The night my daughter-in-law laughed at me across that dinner table, she thought I was just another old woman past her prime. What she didn't know was that the helpless mother she mocked could buy and sell everything she owned with a single signature. If you're watching this video, I'd love to know where you're listening from, your city, your country, or just a hello in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe so we can keep sharing more stories of revenge, resilience, and justice from around the world. My name is Helena, and last Saturday night my son tried to sell me. He didn't mean it that way. He would swear he didn't. He would tell you he loves me, that he just wanted peace, that he just didn't want tension. But when you clean off all the polite words and silk napkins, what happened at that dinner was very simple. The people who married into my family tried to put a price on me so I would disappear quietly. And my own son let them open the conversation. Before we get to that table, I want you to sit with me in the exact moment I realized something was wrong. It was Wednesday evening, 6:32 p.m. I was still at work, 7th floor, glass office, the kind of view you only get when your decisions move numbers that start with 8 and end with 6 zeros. I had 2 contract specialists on speaker, waiting on my approval for an international transfer. My personal phone lit up. It was my son, Adrian. I smiled when I saw his name. I always do. I've carried that boy through every fire a woman can walk through. I've held him when we had $20 left. I've held him when he was sick, and I've held him the night he said, "Mom, I met someone. I think I'm going to marry her." That was pride. That was warmth. That was a mother's oxygen. This call was not warmth. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered. He didn't say, "Hi, Mom." He didn't laugh. He didn't sound relaxed. He sounded like a man calling legal counsel before a scandal breaks. "Mom," he said, "I need a favor. Not I miss you. Not how are you. A favor." That's when my stomach went cold. "What do you need?" I asked. He hesitated. I could hear him swallow. I know that swallow. That swallow is guilt. "So," he said, "Lila's parents are in town. It's their first time here. They want to meet you. We're doing dinner Saturday. It's kind of an upscale place. Can you come?" I almost said yes without thinking. Of course. I'm his mother. I show up. That's my job. But there was something else in his voice, something I had never heard before when he talked about me. Worry. Not worry for me. Worry about me. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the city outside my window. "Do they know anything about me?" I asked. Silence. Then he said, "I told them you work in an office, that you live alone, that you're simple, that you don't have much. I just didn't want them to, feel weird." Or, that was the moment. Not the dinner. Not the offer. Not the humiliation later. No. This. That sentence. "I told them you're simple. I told them you don't have much." Do you know what it feels like to hear your child package you like that for strangers? Let me tell you. It feels like someone reached into your chest, took 39 years of sacrifice, and relabeled it not impressive. It feels like standing in front of a mirror and watching yourself get reduced to an apology. Because that is exactly what he was doing. He was apologizing for me in advance, to people I had never even met. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I've done both in my life, trust me, but not for this. Not for this kind of wound. This kind doesn't make you scream. This kind makes you very, very quiet. "And what did you tell them about yourself?" I asked softly. He gave a little laugh that wasn't a laugh. That I'm doing well, that we just closed on the house, that things are stable. I just wanted them to have the right impression. The right impression. That is when I understood what Saturday was. Saturday was not, "We'd love you to meet the family." Saturday was inspection. Saturday was, "Let's make sure Adrian's mother will not embarrass us." In that moment, something in me went from soft to diamond. And it wasn't anger yet. Anger is hot. This was not hot. This was cold. This was clarity. Because here is what my son does not know. Here is what his lovely, polished wife does not know. Here is what her elegant, expensive parents absolutely do not know. I am not small. I am not fragile. And I am not for sale. I have spent decades allowing people to underestimate me, and I have survived because of it. I let men in suits call me sweetheart when I was 25 and a desperate single mother answering phones, and then I outworked them, outlearned them, and took their jobs from under them without ever raising my voice. I learned logistics, compliance, negotiation, crisis routing. I learned to move product through 7 countries while the men in charge were still Googling the word tariff. I sit now as Senior Vice President of Global Operations. I control budgets that feed entire regions. My basic monthly compensation is what some people call a year, and yet my own son believes I don't have much. Why? Because I chose for him to believe that. Because I raised him on values, not access. Because I never hung my money in front of him like jewelry. Because when he was little, we had nothing. And I swore something. He would grow up grateful, not greedy. He would know work, not entitlement. He would know love, not leverage. So, yes. I live in a modest apartment, and I still cook my own food, and I still carry the same worn leather wallet I've had for 15 years. I don't post my life. I don't parade it. I keep my peace quiet. But that night, after his call, standing alone in my office while the entire skyline burned gold against the glass, I understood something ugly. To them, quiet looks like weak. To them, modest looks like lesser. To them, respect is only given after money is proven and displayed. So I made a decision. I was going to that dinner. But I was not going as Helena, who signs 9-digit contracts and makes $60,000 a month before bonuses. I was going as Helena, the problem. Helena, the burden. Helena, the poor mother. I was going to walk into that expensive restaurant looking exactly like the kind of woman Cassandra and Victor, my in-laws to be, believe they are allowed to insult. And I was going to let them talk. I was going to let them show themselves. I was going to let them measure me, pity me, classify me. I was going to let them try to buy me. Then I was going to cut their little world in half. That was decided before I even hung up. Okay, I told my son calmly. I'll be there. He actually sighed in relief. That almost broke me more than the words. He sounded like a man who had successfully contained a risk. Thank you, Mom, he whispered. Just, please don't be offended if... Adrian, I said. I'll be there. I ended the call. And then I did something I have not done in years. I laughed out loud, alone, in that glass office. Not because any of this was funny. Because Cassandra does not know me. Because Victor does not know me. Because they think Saturday night is going to be dinner. They don't understand it's going to be a lesson. And they're the ones on the syllabus. If you want to hear exactly how that dinner went, the offer they made me, the number they put on my existence, and what I did to them in return, make sure you're subscribed. Your support is what lets me keep telling stories nobody dares to say out loud. Before we go on, let me ask you something, just between us. Imagine you invite your mother to meet your in-laws for the first time. Which one are you, honestly? A. You protect her, you say, this is my mother, treat her with respect. Or B. You warn them she's simple, so they don't judge you. Tell me, are you A or B? That night, I didn't turn on the lights when I got home. I just stood by the window, watching the city below me pulse and glitter, and felt something I hadn't let myself feel in years, disappointment heavy enough to shake my bones. Not anger, not yet. Just the slow, humiliating sting that comes when you realize your own child has rehearsed your inferiority for strangers. I've been underestimated before, but never by him. I set down my keys, unbuttoned my jacket, and stared at the faint reflection of my face in the glass. It was the face of a woman everyone sees, but no one truly looks at a woman who's given decades to others, who learned how to be strong without noise. Somewhere along the years of surviving, I'd made my strength invisible. And now invisibility had turned into misunderstanding. When you spend your life building, people forget to ask what it cost you. I thought of Adrian as a child barefoot on the apartment floor, his little hands smudged with chalk. He used to tell me I was the smartest person in the world because I could fix things. Toys, leaks, broken hearts. Somewhere between those chalk drawings and the mortgage papers he signs now, that faith had vanished, maybe because I hid too well how hard I worked. Maybe because I wanted him to see peace instead of the chaos that made it. So that night, I made myself remember what I never tell anyone. I remembered being 22, pregnant and terrified, carrying him in my belly while typing reports for men who couldn't remember my name. I remembered hiding morning sickness in bathroom stalls so I wouldn't lose my job. I remembered taking buses at dawn, pretending exhaustion was dignity. And I remembered the moment I promised myself that this child, this boy, would never know hunger, shame, or dependency. That promise built everything I have. Every late night, every promotion, every lesson learned the hard way. But promises can turn into prisons if you never stop paying for them. I sat down at the kitchen table, that same scratched wooden one I bought secondhand decades ago, and opened my planner. Contracts, deadlines, signatures, all the emblems of a woman in control. Yet in my son's eyes, I was still the woman from before success, the one who worried about bus fare and prayed the rent cleared. He didn't know that those prayers turned into strategies long ago. He didn't know that the office job he imagines is a position commanding 7 countries, 15,000 employees, and budgets larger than he could ever imagine. He didn't know that the reason I keep living simply is because peace tastes better than performance. He didn't know because I never told him. That was my mistake. I thought I was protecting him from arrogance. Instead, I protected him from truth. There's a quiet kind of pain in realizing you've raised someone to be kind, but not perceptive enough to see you. So, I decided something that night. I would go to that dinner, yes, but not as Helena the executive, the woman who moves money across continents with a single signature. No, that woman would stay home. The Helena they think I am, the small, harmless, invisible one, she would take my place. She would smile, nod, and let them talk. Because if you want to see who people really are, you have to give them space to show you. That's the oldest strategy I've learned in business. Silence is the sharpest tool in the room. I poured myself tea, the bitter kind that keeps you awake, and began to plan. Not the kind of plan you put on paper, but the kind you feel in your pulse. The kind that tightens every muscle of restraint so you don't lash out, you calculate. I would dress simply. No jewelry. No watch. The same old shoes I wear for grocery runs. I would arrive early, sit quietly, and observe. They would think I was nervous, unsophisticated, grateful to be included. They would lean back in their chairs, relax into superiority, and show me who they were when they thought they were safe. And then, when the right moment came, I would pull the curtain down. It wasn't revenge I wanted, it was revelation. I wanted my son to see them, not the polished version they performed, but the contempt beneath the perfume. I wanted him to see how easily charm turns into cruelty when they sense weakness. And I wanted him to see me, truly see me, for the first time in years. Before bed, I went to my closet and touched the suit I wear for international meetings. Crisp, commanding. It made me feel powerful every time. I pushed it aside and found a faded beige dress I hadn't worn in a decade. Loose seams, soft fabric, unflattering, perfect. I hung it on the door and stared at it for a long moment. It looked like a disguise and a memory at once. I almost cried, not because of the dress itself, but because there was a time when I didn't have to pretend to look that poor. I really was. I let the memory sting. I wanted to remember the woman who started with nothing, who faced a world that told her no and turned it into a career that made her untouchable. That woman wasn't gone, she was just quiet now, waiting. I turned off the lights and lay in bed, wide awake. Through the window, the city's hum felt distant, almost forgiving. I thought about Cassandra and Victor, the in-laws I hadn't met but already knew. I knew their kind, the kind that uses politeness like a knife, the kind that weighs others like currency. I could already hear her tone. So, what do you do, Helena? Sweet, curious, cruel. They had no idea who they were inviting to dinner. They would see a tired woman in an old dress. They would assume they could talk over her, pity her, maybe even offer her help she didn't ask for. And I would let them. Every word would go into my mental file, every look, every pause, until the right moment arrived, the one that would silence every insult in one clean stroke. People mistake silence for weakness because they've never met someone who can weaponize it. By the time dawn crept through the curtains, my decision was steel. I wasn't going there to defend my worth. I was going there to remind them what real worth looks like when it doesn't need to be announced. I brewed one last cup of coffee and wrote myself a single line on a notepad before leaving for work. Let them underestimate you. It's the most expensive mistake they'll ever make. When I looked at those words, I smiled. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't dreading a confrontation. I was anticipating it. The game was set. And I had already won. I stood in front of the mirror on Saturday evening and barely recognized the woman looking back. The dress was older than I cared to admit. Beige, shapeless, wrinkled in ways that couldn't be ironed out. I had bought it years ago, when money was still something I counted before sleeping, not a number on a quarterly report. The shoes were scuffed. My hair, tied back without care, made me look smaller, softer. That was the point. I wasn't dressing for admiration. I was dressing for invisibility. In my world, power dresses quietly, but tonight, silence would be my disguise. I slipped my wallet into a plain grocery tote, the kind that sags when you put too much weight in it. Inside, beneath a few crumpled receipts, rested my Centurion card and a document folder embossed with the logo of the company I help run. I would never show them, at least not until I wanted to. The thrill wasn't in revealing power, it was in deciding when to. The taxi arrived 15 minutes early. The driver, a polite man with kind eyes, opened the door and asked where to. I told him the name of the restaurant, one of those places where menus don't have prices, and lighting is designed to flatter wealth. He whistled softly and said, "Special night?" "Something like that," I answered. The city rolled by in gold and shadow. I watched the buildings slide past the office tower I'd built a career in, the tiny cafe where I used to grade spreadsheets for extra pay, the park bench where I once cried quietly so my son wouldn't hear. They were all ghosts of the same story. A woman who had to prove she could stand alone. When the car stopped, I didn't move right away. Through the glass I could already see them. Adrian in his tailored suit, standing with his back straight but shoulders tight. Lila, polished to perfection, her smile rehearsed. And two strangers with the posture of people who believe they own the air around them. Cassandra and Victor Hartwell, my new in-laws. I paid the driver and stepped out. The restaurant doors glimmered like a theater entrance. Inside, music played low enough to remind you this wasn't a place for noise. The hostess gave me one long, confused glance before leading me toward their table. Adrian saw me first. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second, then narrowed into that polite, strained expression that children wear when they're afraid you'll embarrass them. "Mom," he said, forcing a smile. "You made it." I smiled back, small and unthreatening. "Of course, sweetheart, I wouldn't miss it." Lila kissed my cheek, a gesture that smelled of perfume and hesitation. Her hand barely brushed my arm. "So nice you could join us," she murmured. Then I met Cassandra. She didn't stand up. She looked me over, from the frayed edge of my dress to the tote bag hanging off my arm, and smiled like she was examining a charity case. "You must be Helena," she said sweetly. "Must, not pleasure." The word landed like a pin drop. I reached out to shake her hand. Her fingers rested in mine for half a second, just long enough to meet etiquette, not long enough to mean it. Her husband, Victor, nodded once and said, "Welcome." His tone suggested permission, not greeting. I took the seat they'd left empty. It wasn't near the head of the table. It wasn't anywhere near comfort. It was the place you give someone you expect to be quiet. The waiter brought the menus. Heavy leather, gold trim, all in French. Cassandra didn't miss the way my brow furrowed. "Would you like me to help you choose something?" she offered. I smiled with deliberate hesitation. "Yes, please. I'm not used to places like this." "Oh, don't worry," she said, pretending kindness. "We'll order something simple for you, nothing too extravagant." Her husband chuckled. "Not everyone's built for luxury, my dear." Adrian shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. I didn't save him, not yet. They spoke about their week, the flight from Boston, their shopping, their charity gala. The words foundation and investment and villa floated across the table like decorations meant to remind everyone of their status. I nodded politely, occasionally letting my eyes widen in faux awe. Every performance needs applause. When Cassandra finally turned the conversation toward me, I was ready. "And what about you, Helena?" she asked. "Adrian said you work in an office. How sweet. Do you enjoy it?" "Oh, yes," I said softly. "I like routine. Paperwork mostly. I help with numbers. Nothing important." She smiled in triumph, the way predators do when they've sniffed weakness. "That's lovely. Stability matters, especially at your age." "At your age?" Her words slid through me, cold and predictable. But I didn't flinch. I just smiled, folding my napkin neatly. "You're right," I said. "Stability does matter. Some of us have to build it ourselves." That flicker in her eyes barely there, but I saw it told me she heard the layer beneath the words. She didn't like it. Dinner arrived. Expensive plates disguised as art. Cassandra lifted her fork delicately and said, "We were telling Adrian we're proud of how far he's come. We've supported them a lot, of course financially, emotionally, all of that. It's what family does, isn't it?" Victor leaned in, his voice booming with self-approval. "We gave $80,000 for the down payment on their home, $30,000 for the honeymoon. It's important for young couples to start with comfort." "Very generous," I said. Cassandra tilted her head. "We don't like to talk about money, but of course not everyone can offer that kind of help. It must be hard for you, living alone, working so steadily. You must worry about the future." "Sometimes," I admitted, my voice mild, "but I've learned to make peace with what I have." She smiled, pleased with herself. "That's such a healthy attitude. We were actually discussing—" She glanced at Victor, then back at me. "The idea of giving you a small allowance each month, just so you don't have to rely on Adrian too much. Maybe 1,000, 1,200. We're not billionaires, but we want to make sure you're comfortable." My fork paused above the plate. An allowance. $1,000. The same people who just bragged about spending $80,000 on a down payment were offering me pocket change to stay out of my own son's life. I set the fork down and dabbed my lips with the napkin. "That's very thoughtful," I said. "And what would I do in return?" Cassandra's eyes sparkled. "Oh, nothing dramatic. Just give them space. Don't burden them. Don't call too often. You understand they need to focus on building their future." Silence stretched. Adrian opened his mouth, panic in his eyes. "Mom, that's not—" I lifted my hand gently. "It's all right," I said. Then I turned to Cassandra. "Tell me, Cassandra, how much do you think a mother's silence is worth? 1,000 a month? Or perhaps 1,200, if she behaves?" Her smile faltered. "I didn't mean—" "Oh, you did," I said softly. "And I want you to keep talking. I want to hear every thought you have about how much peace costs." The table froze. Cassandra's knuckles whitened around her fork. Victor's face tightened. Adrian looked down, his throat moving. I leaned back, calm as the eye of a storm. "Please, go on, I'm listening." They didn't. And for the first time that night, Cassandra looked uncertain. She didn't know it yet, but the dinner had just changed hands. The performance was over. Now it was my stage. The restaurant was too quiet after that question. It was as if every sound, the murmur of conversations, the clinking of silverware, even the soft music had paused to listen. Cassandra blinked once, twice, her painted lips still parted in the ghost of a smile that no longer knew what to do with itself. Victor shifted in his chair, adjusting his cufflinks, pretending composure but betraying discomfort in the way his fingers twitched. Adrian sat frozen, his gaze darting between us like a man realizing the dinner he'd planned to impress everyone had turned into a battlefield. "My silence," I repeated softly. "Is that what this conversation is about? Buying it?" Victor cleared his throat, his voice measured but condescending. "You're misunderstanding, Helena. We're only offering a little stability. We don't want Adrian to feel obligated. It's about balance in the family." "Balance," I said, tasting the word. "That's an interesting word to use when the scales only tilt one way." Cassandra's smile reappeared, thin, rehearsed, and trembling at the edges. "You're being sensitive," she said. "We're trying to include you. You live alone, don't you? It must get lonely. We thought you'd appreciate the gesture." "The gesture?" I murmured, leaning slightly forward. Of being managed? Her eyes hardened. Of being cared for. I set my napkin down, slowly, deliberately. My voice was quiet, but each syllable felt like a weight sliding across the table. Cared for. Cassandra, let me tell you what care looks like. It looks like walking 2 miles to a clinic because the bus fare had to go to your child's lunch. It looks like ironing the same blouse 100 times to make it look new for the next job interview. It looks like working 3 shifts while a baby sleeps in a laundry basket beside your desk. That's care. What you're describing is control. The air between us thickened. Lila, who had been silent the entire evening, shifted uncomfortably. Her voice, small but shaking, broke the quiet. Mom, maybe we should just… Lila, Cassandra snapped, never taking her eyes off me. Please, adults are talking. That did it. The polite mask she'd worn all evening cracked clean in two. Behind it was something colder, not wealth, not confidence, but the kind of cruelty that comes from thinking the world exists to reflect your own importance. I recognized it. I had seen it in the men I used to work under, in the clients who spoke to secretaries like furniture, in every person who mistook silence for inferiority. Cassandra wasn't new. She was just another version of power without substance. I looked at her and smiled faintly. You're right. Adults are talking. So let's be honest, shall we? You don't want to help me. You want to erase me. You want me quiet enough that your daughter never has to explain the part of her husband that came from a woman like me, a woman who worked instead of married well, who earned instead of inherited. Her face flushed. That's ridiculous, she snapped. No one said that. You didn't have to. Victor's chair creaked as he leaned back, his tone low and sharp. You're making quite a scene, Helena. This isn't becoming. Becoming? I echoed. What an old-fashioned word. I suppose women like me are supposed to be grateful, quiet, and becoming, while people like you do the unbecoming things, condescend, belittle, and then call it grace. Cassandra's fork hit the plate with a sharp clang. I don't have to sit here and be insulted. Good, I said. Because I'm not insulting you. I'm describing you. Adrian spoke up then, his voice trembling. Mom, please, can we not… Not what? I asked him, turning gently. Not tell the truth? Not correct the story before it hardens into a lie? He said nothing. His eyes, dark and conflicted, darted toward Lila, who was staring down at her lap, twisting her napkin so tightly it might tear. Cassandra took a slow breath, trying to reassemble her composure. Helena, she said finally, with the false patience of a person who believes they are superior, I understand that life has been harder for you, and that can make people defensive, but we're not your enemies. We're family now. And I think, for everyone's peace, it's best if you understand where your place is in that family. My place. That was the word that cut through everything else. Because I've spent a lifetime being told where my place was, behind desks, beside men, beneath decisions, and I've spent a lifetime proving that every single one of those people was wrong. So when she said it, I felt something inside me go still. Not anger, not pride, just a bone-deep certainty. The kind you can only earn after you've buried too many humiliations to count. I folded my hands on the table, looked her directly in the eye, and said quietly, My place is wherever I choose to stand. For a second, no one breathed. Even the waiter passing by slowed down, sensing the voltage in the air. Then Cassandra laughed. But it wasn't the confident laugh from before. It cracked at the edges. You're quite theatrical, aren't you? Is this how you behave at work too? No wonder Adrian tried to protect us from… whatever this is. Adrian's head snapped toward her. Enough. Her eyes widened. Excuse me? I said enough, he repeated, louder this time. You've been patronizing her since the moment she walked in. Do you even hear yourself? This isn't kindness. It's humiliation dressed in pearls. Victor's jaw tightened. Watch your tone, son. No, Adrian said. For once, maybe you should watch yours. Cassandra looked between us, disbelief and fury flashing in her eyes. Adrian, she hissed, don't you dare speak to me like that because of this woman. This woman? I interrupted, my tone sharp but calm. You mean the one who raised him? Who paid for every school, every meal, every mistake, until he could build a life good enough for you to judge. Her mouth opened, then shut again. She had no words left that wouldn't cost her pride. Lila, trembling now, whispered, "Mom, stop." Cassandra turned on her. "You don't understand. I'm protecting you." Lila looked up, her voice breaking. "From what? From kindness? From decency?" It was Victor who ended it. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. "We're leaving," he said. "This conversation is over." "Finally," I murmured. Cassandra rose, her movements sharp, angry. She turned to me with a final glare. "You've made a very bad impression tonight, Helena. You've embarrassed your son and yourself." I picked up my glass of water, holding her gaze steadily. "No, Cassandra," I said. "I've corrected one." She stared at me for a long moment, then stormed out, her husband following. The silence that followed was heavier than the wine. Adrian exhaled shakily. "Mom." I reached across the table and touched his hand. "It's all right. It had to happen." He nodded, but there was guilt in his eyes, the kind that comes from realizing you've handed your mother to the wolves and watched her survive without you. As he paid the bill and we stepped outside, the night air felt cleaner, sharper, almost forgiving. The city lights flickered against the glass of the restaurant behind us, and for the first time, I didn't feel small beneath them. I felt precise. They had tried to define me, and I had reminded them that I write my own definitions. I turned to Adrian, who still looked shaken. "You did the right thing," I said softly. He nodded, voice hoarse. "I should have done it sooner." Maybe so, but the truth always arrives on time. As we walked toward the car, I looked up at the sky and thought they invited me to dinner, but really, they walked into my lesson. And the lesson was simple. Never mistake a quiet woman for a powerless one. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The calm that followed was the kind that makes people nervous, the quiet before they realize they've been standing in the wrong story all along. Cassandra was still holding her fork, but her appetite had evaporated. Victor's eyes darted toward the waiter as if he wanted the evening rescued by interruption. Adrian sat motionless beside me, guilt and disbelief flickering across his face. They thought I'd crumble under the weight of their superiority. Instead, I was steady, almost serene. I had learned a long time ago that silence isn't weakness, it's a test. And they had failed it beautifully. I leaned back slightly, folding my hands on the table, and looked at Cassandra. "You've spent this entire meal talking about generosity," I said softly, "and yet somehow every act of it sounds like a transaction. You buy affection. You measure worth. You mistake ownership for love." Her expression faltered. "That's not what I—" "It's exactly what you meant," I said, my tone even. "You didn't offer me kindness. You offered me a price, $1,000 a month in exchange for erasure. A neat little arrangement where I fade quietly out of my son's life, while you get to play the benevolent matriarch." Victor straightened, his voice sharp. "Now listen, Helena." I turned to him, unblinking. "No, you listen. Because I've been listening all night. I listened to your stories about money. Your little boasts about the house, the gifts, the support you've given. I listened while you turned love into an invoice. But let me make something clear, my son is not your investment, and I am not your liability." For a long moment, no one spoke. Cassandra looked at Adrian, searching for reinforcement, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. I saw the panic creep in then, the dawning awareness that she'd misjudged the entire situation. I let the silence stretch before I spoke again, quietly but with precision. "Do you know what I do for a living, Cassandra?" She blinked. "You said you work in an office." "Yes," I said. "That's true. I do. A rather large one, with glass walls, 4 floors up, overlooking 7 countries' worth of operations. I manage logistics, contracts, and compliance for a company that moves products you probably have in your home. I don't file papers. I sign them. I don't take orders. I give them. I am Senior Vice President of Global Operations. I'm responsible for 15,000 employees, and I make $60,000 a month before bonuses." Her hand froze halfway to her glass. "I am not telling you this to boast," I continued, still calm. I'm telling you this because you decided to speak to me like a woman who needed permission to exist. You thought you could weigh my value the way you weigh your jewelry. You see, the difference between us isn't money, it's perception. I know what I'm worth without needing to announce it. Cassandra's face drained of color. That's absurd, she muttered, her voice unsteady. If that were true, Adrian would have said. Would he? I asked softly. When exactly? Between defending your opinions or apologizing for mine? He doesn't talk about me because I never made my success his burden. I wanted him to build his own. I didn't raise a man to compete with his mother's paycheck. I raised a man who should have been proud of her strength. Adrian's throat tightened. He whispered, Mom. But I didn't look at him yet. This wasn't for him. Victor tried to recover the balance of the room. Regardless of your position, you're being unnecessarily harsh. My wife was simply trying to help. Help, I repeated. You mean handle. It's a common mistake. Powerful people often believe they're helping when they're really controlling. Cassandra's eyes flashed. You've humiliated us. No, I said, leaning in slightly. You humiliated yourself. I just stopped protecting you from the echo of your own words. That was when the waiter approached, holding the check discreetly in a black folder. Cassandra reached for her bag, eager for an exit, but Victor raised a hand. I've got it, he said with forced authority, pulling a gold card from his wallet. He placed it on the table like a shield. We waited. The waiter returned after a moment, his tone polite but uneasy. I'm sorry, sir, this card didn't go through. It might be a temporary hold. Cassandra stiffened. Run it again, she said sharply. It's fine. The waiter nodded and walked away. I almost pitied her, because I knew what was coming. When the waiter returned a second time, his voice had softened further. I'm sorry, ma'am, but it was declined again. Victor's face reddened. That's impossible. Call the bank. I can, the waiter said, but it might take some time. Cassandra's cheeks flamed crimson. I could see her pride folding in on itself. Lila looked like she might sink under the table. Adrian sat rigid, his hand rubbing the edge of his napkin until it tore. I reached for my tote, opened it slowly, and took out my card. The metal one, matte black, no logo, no limit. I set it on the check without a word. The waiter's eyes widened for a fraction of a second. Thank you, Miss Duran, he said quietly, and hurried away. Cassandra stared at the card as though it had burned her. What is that? Just something simple, I said. For people who pay their own way. Her eyes flicked to Adrian, then back to me. You planned this? No, I said, shaking my head. You planned the humiliation. I just refused to play my assigned role. Victor cleared his throat. There's no need to make a spectacle. There already is one, I replied, and I'm not the one who created it. When the waiter brought back the receipt, I signed it, handed back the folder, and stood. My chair made no sound against the floor. Dinner's on me, I said. Consider it a small investment in your education. I turned to Adrian. You can stay if you want, or you can come with me. Either way, this table doesn't deserve another minute of your time. He stood up immediately. Cassandra reached for his arm. Adrian, don't you walk away from me. He shook her off. You walked away first, Mom, he said quietly, and followed me out. Outside, the night was cool, the air tasting like rain. We stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, the noise of the city washing around us. I'm sorry, he said finally. His voice broke. I thought keeping the peace was protecting you. I didn't realize peace isn't worth anything if it means silence. I looked at him. Really looked not as the boy I raised, but as the man he was becoming. Now you do, I said. And that's enough. He nodded, swallowing hard. What happens now? Now, I said, glancing back at the restaurant. Now they get to learn the same lesson everyone who's underestimated me has learned, that you can't buy what was earned in fire. He exhaled, shaky but lighter somehow. You're incredible, Mom. No, I said softly, just patient, and I finally ran out of patience. As we walked toward the car, the clouds shifted above us. The city lights caught the wet pavement, glowing like spilled gold. Somewhere behind us, I imagined Cassandra and Victor sitting in their expensive silence, realizing for the first time that money doesn't always win. And as for me, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. The next morning, sunlight spilled across my kitchen table, glinting off a half-empty cup of coffee. I had barely slept. Not because of guilt, no. That part of me had gone quiet long ago, but because my mind kept replaying the moment Cassandra's mask slipped. That flash of disbelief when she realized the woman she'd tried to humiliate was the one holding all the power. I used to think moments like that belonged to movies. But sometimes, life writes its own script, sharper than anything you could imagine. When the phone rang, I already knew who it was. Adrian's voice sounded tired, hesitant. "Mom," he said softly, "she's furious. She said you embarrassed her, that you made her look small in front of the staff." I smiled faintly. Funny. I didn't need to make her look small. She did that herself. He sighed. "They said they won't invite us to the family fundraiser next month. Dad's pretending to take her side, but he's humiliated too." "That's fine," I said. "You don't need their dinners, Adrian. They don't gather people, they collect them." There was a pause, then his voice softened. "You really don't care, do you?" I looked out the window at the small garden I'd planted years ago, when money was tight and hope was something I watered every morning just to see it grow. "No, son," I said. I stopped caring the moment they mistook my kindness for weakness. There's a difference between being polite and being submissive. Last night just reminded me why I prefer honesty to civility. He was quiet for a while, then whispered, "I'm proud of you." That caught me off guard. My throat tightened. "You shouldn't be proud of me for defending myself, Adrian. You should be angry that I had to." "I am," he said, "but I'm learning." After we hung up, I sat still for a long time, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean. By noon, a message arrived from an unfamiliar number. It was Cassandra. "You've made a mockery of our family. Whatever respect I had for you is gone." I stared at the words for a moment, then typed a simple reply. "Respect built on ignorance isn't worth keeping." I didn't wait for a response. Instead, I opened my laptop. My company's HR director had sent an email marked urgent. The board wanted me to represent the company at a leadership summit in New York, a 3-day conference featuring executives from across the country. I declined last year. This time, I said yes. Because something inside me had shifted. Last night wasn't just about Cassandra. It was about reclaiming parts of myself I had tucked away to make others comfortable. For years, I had played the modest mother, the unassuming woman who never corrected anyone's assumptions. But the truth? I was tired of shrinking to fit someone else's narrative. A week later, I walked into that conference hall in Manhattan, wearing the same calm I'd worn at dinner, but this time, it wasn't armor. It was identity. The hotel lobby smelled faintly of cedar and success. Voices echoed in every corner, deals being made in half-whispers. When I took the stage to deliver my keynote, I didn't start with figures or forecasts. I started with truth. "I was raised to believe that hard work speaks for itself," I said into the microphone. "But the older I get, the more I realize it whispers. You have to amplify it yourself. Because if you stay silent long enough, someone else will narrate your story, and they will always get it wrong." The room was silent. Then applause, a standing ovation that felt less like praise and more like recognition. Later that evening, while sipping tea in my hotel room, I received another call, this time from Simone, my daughter-in-law. Her voice trembled slightly. "Helena, I just wanted to say, thank you, for what you did, for showing them, and for showing me." I frowned slightly. "Showing you what?" "That being quiet doesn't mean being small," she said. "I've spent years letting my parents dictate who I should be, how I should live. But when you stood up for yourself, I realized you were standing up for all of us, even me." Her words landed heavier than I expected. Because for all the satisfaction revenge gives, empathy gives peace, and peace was rarer. We talked for a long time, about her dreams, her regrets, about how she'd grown up watching her mother belittle others out of fear of being ordinary. "She worships control," Simone said softly. "I think she forgot that love doesn't survive under control, it suffocates." When we hung up, I felt something ease in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. Weeks passed. The story of that dinner traveled faster than gossip should. The staff at the restaurant whispered about the quiet woman with the black card. The Hartwells' friends began avoiding mention of the incident. Cassandra, apparently, had taken to explaining it as a misunderstanding, though everyone could hear the bitterness lacing her voice. Adrian stopped visiting their house. He and Simone started inviting me over instead. Small dinners, laughter, real warmth. One evening, as I helped him fix a crooked picture frame in their hallway, he turned to me and said, "Do you think she'll ever change?" "No," I said gently. "People like her don't change. They adapt their cruelty. They find new languages for the same fear." "Fear?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "She's terrified of being ordinary, of being forgettable. That's why she collects people and things to prove she matters. But real worth doesn't need witnesses." He nodded slowly, as if memorizing the words. A month later, I received a handwritten letter rare these days. The handwriting was elegant, controlled, unmistakably Cassandra's. "I've thought about that night. You're right about some things, wrong about others. But you were right about one. Control isn't love. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say I understand now." There was no signature, no closing line, just those sentences. I sat there for a while, rereading the letter until the ink blurred slightly from the pressure of my thumb. Then I folded it and placed it in my drawer. Not out of sentimentality, but as proof that even the most stubborn hearts can be cracked open, if only for a moment. That night, as I looked out over the city from my balcony, I realized something profound. Revenge is satisfying, but revelation is sacred. Because the real victory isn't when others kneel, it's when they finally see. The stars above Manhattan flickered faintly, as if nodding in agreement. And I thought, yes, this is what freedom feels like. Quiet, certain, earned. The following Sunday, the city was quiet in that rare, suspended way that happens before a storm. Clouds hung low over the skyline, and the streets were slick from an earlier drizzle. I was sitting by the window with a cup of tea when Adrian and Simone arrived, carrying a small box and two nervous smiles. "Mom," Adrian said softly, setting the box on the table, "we brought something for you." I studied them. There was a gentleness in their posture that hadn't been there before, the kind that grows only after people have been humbled by truth. Inside the box was a framed photograph. It was taken the night before their wedding, the three of us standing together in my living room. Adrian was in his tuxedo, Simone in a soft ivory dress, and I in the background had my hands on their shoulders. I remembered that moment vividly. I had told Simone, "You're not joining our family to replace anyone. You're joining to expand it." Now, years later, that photo looked like an artifact from a different era, one before judgment, before arrogance, before the world decided to test whether love could survive pride. Simone's voice broke the silence. "I want to make things right," she said. "I can't change what my parents did, but I can choose not to repeat it." I nodded slowly. "That's all redemption ever is, a choice." She hesitated, then added, "They've been asking to meet you, to apologize, but I didn't want to agree without asking you first." I set down my cup. "Apologize?" Adrian nodded. "Cassandra's been different. After the letter she sent, she hasn't stopped talking about what happened. I think she's finally realizing what she lost that night." I looked at both of them, my son, the man who'd learned humility the hard way, and his wife, the woman brave enough to confront the shadow of her upbringing. "If she wants to meet, she can come here. On my terms." They exchanged glances, both relieved and nervous. 2 days later, Cassandra arrived. She came without Victor. That, in itself, was telling. She wore a simple beige coat and no jewelry, a deliberate departure from her usual performance of wealth. When I opened the door, she looked at me the way one looks at a person whose forgiveness they aren't sure they deserve. "Helena," she said quietly, "thank you for letting me come." I gestured toward the living room. "Sit down. Tea?" She nodded, folding her hands in her lap. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The air between us was dense, not with hostility anymore, but with the weight of two women who had finally run out of pretense. "I owe you an apology," she said at last. "Not for the dinner, for everything before it, for assuming things about you, for deciding who you were before ever asking." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. "I was raised to believe that status protected us," she continued, "that if you controlled the narrative, you controlled the world. My mother taught me that vulnerability was the first step toward irrelevance. I passed that poison to my daughter without even realizing it. I mocked what I didn't understand: independence, humility, strength that doesn't announce itself." I listened without interrupting. She wasn't wrong. That poison ran deep in families like hers, the kind that built their sense of worth on comparison instead of character. "After that night," she said, "I kept asking myself why your words hurt so much. It wasn't humiliation, it was recognition. You reminded me of the woman I wanted to be before I learned to hide behind performance." Her honesty disarmed me. I poured tea into her cup and mine, the quiet sound of liquid-filling porcelain bridging the gap between us. "People like us," I said gently, "spend too long learning how to look strong instead of how to be strong. It's not all your fault, Cassandra. We were raised in a world that taught women power only through men, through husbands, sons, connections. It takes a long time to unlearn that." She nodded slowly. "It cost me almost everything." "Then don't waste the cost," I said. "Make it worth something." There was a silence after that, not uncomfortable but reflective, the kind of silence that feels like two people standing at the same edge, staring into the same horizon. Finally, she reached into her bag and took out an envelope. "This isn't money," she said quickly, seeing my expression. "It's an invitation. The foundation my husband and I have been funding, the one for young women in business. We're hosting a scholarship dinner next month. I want you to speak." I raised an eyebrow. "You're sure about that?" She smiled faintly. "If I can't face the woman who taught me what real leadership looks like, then what's the point?" I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to refuse, to keep the boundary clean, but another part, the one that had spent decades watching women tear each other down, knew better. If change was going to mean anything, it had to be shared. "All right," I said. "I'll come, but I'll speak about truth, not charity." "That's exactly what I'm hoping for." When she left an hour later, I stood by the door for a long time, listening to the sound of her car fading into the distance. There was something strange about forgiveness. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't feel like fireworks or thunder. It felt like a quiet exhale after years of holding your breath. That night, I sat with Adrian and Simone at dinner. The light from the candles flickered across their faces, and I thought about how full circle everything had come. "You know," Simone said softly, "I think she's finally proud of you." I smiled. "She doesn't need to be. I'm proud enough for both of us." Adrian reached over and took my hand. "You changed her life, Mom." "No," I said. "She changed it herself. I just stopped cushioning her fall." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "You always know exactly what to say." I looked at him for a moment, studying the fine lines around his eyes, the evidence of years and choices, of growing into the man I'd hoped he'd become. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I just learned that silence and words have the same power if you use them at the right time." Outside, the rain began again, gentle, steady, cleansing. As I cleared the table, I found myself thinking about the word legacy. For so long I had believed it meant inheritance money, possessions, titles, but now I understood it differently. Legacy was not what you leave behind, it was who you leave standing taller than before. And in that moment, with my son laughing softly beside his wife, with peace resting in the corners of a home that had once known tension, I realized that for the first time in a very long while, I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. The night of the foundation dinner arrived with the kind of quiet tension that always precedes something irreversible. The venue, a glass-walled ballroom overlooking the river, was bathed in gold light. The tables gleamed with crystal, the air humming with soft music, and the murmurs of people who had never known what it meant to lose everything and start again. I arrived alone. No driver, no entourage, just me in a black suit with clean lines and an unadorned silver pin. I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there to tell the truth. Cassandra greeted me at the entrance. She looked different, calmer, smaller, and yet somehow larger. She no longer wore her power like a costume, she carried it with quiet awareness. "Helena," she said, her voice almost warm, "you came." I said I would. She nodded, a flicker of humility passing through her face. "You're seated at the head table. The keynote is right after dinner." As I followed her inside, I noticed the crowd watching. There's a peculiar energy when people who once underestimated you are forced to confront their own blindness. Some smiled politely, others whispered. I met their eyes one by one, and not a single one of them held my gaze for long. Dinner passed in fragments, polite conversation, laughter that didn't quite reach the eyes, the clinking of forks against porcelain. I barely touched my food. My mind wasn't in the room. It was in the words I'd prepared, words that had lived inside me for years, waiting for the right moment to step into the light. When Cassandra took the stage to introduce me, she spoke briefly about transformation. "There are people," she said, "who don't just survive hardship, they redefine it. Helena Duran is one of those people. Tonight she'll speak about the power of integrity in leadership." Applause followed, scattered but sincere. I walked to the podium. The lights dimmed slightly. I could see the reflection of my own face on the glass walls behind the crowd, the woman I had become, steady and unflinching. I began simply, "I used to believe success was about arrival," I said. "A destination you reach if you work hard enough and wait your turn. But the truth is, arrival is an illusion. You never arrive, you evolve. You stumble, you rebuild, you redefine yourself again and again, until one day you realize that the place you were trying to reach was inside you all along." A hush fell over the room. "I've sat in rooms like this before," I continued. "Rooms filled with people who smile too easily and speak in measured tones about ethics, vision, leadership. But I've also sat at smaller tables, tables where people are deciding whether to pay rent or buy groceries, where leadership means holding your family together with two tired hands and a promise. I've learned that the real test of power isn't how you lead when you're applauded, it's how you act when no one's watching." A man in the front row nodded slowly. Cassandra's eyes glistened. "Some of you know me as an executive," I said. "But before that, I was a secretary. Before that, a clerk. Before that, a janitor's daughter cleaning offices after midnight so her son could go to school. I know what it feels like to be invisible, and I know what it takes to be seen again." The silence deepened, not heavy but reverent. "When people talk about women in leadership," I said, "they often use words like balance, grace, or composure. But I prefer another word, endurance. Grace without endurance is decoration. Endurance without grace is bitterness. The balance is what makes us powerful." A faint ripple of applause. I looked around the room at faces that had once judged me by my modest clothes, my quiet manners, my lack of pedigree. "If you remember one thing tonight, let it be this: dignity is not given, it's claimed. And once you claim it, no one, no title, no fortune, no person can take it from you." When I stepped down from the stage, Cassandra was crying. Not theatrically, but quietly, the kind of crying that comes from recognition rather than guilt. She reached for my hand. "You made them see," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "You made them listen." The rest of the evening unfolded like a slow exhale. Conversations softened. People approached me not with flattery, but with sincerity. They spoke about their mothers, their mentors, the women who'd fought their own private wars behind polite smiles. As I was leaving, Cassandra caught up with me near the exit. "There's one more thing," she said, holding out a folder. "A scholarship in your name, for women over 40 who are starting over." It felt right. For the first time that night, I was speechless. "You don't have to do that." "I know," she said, "but I want to." I took the folder, feeling its weight. "Then make sure they earn it," I said. "No pity, no shortcuts, just opportunity." She smiled faintly. "You haven't changed." "Oh, I have," I said. "I've just changed in the direction I was always meant to go." Outside, the rain had stopped. The river shimmered with reflections from the city lights. I walked alone along the embankment, listening to the sound of distant traffic and thinking about how strange redemption was. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like release. When I got home that night, I placed the folder on my desk. The house was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. I looked around the framed photographs, the books stacked unevenly, the faint smell of jasmine tea still lingering from the morning, and felt something I hadn't in years. Peace that didn't depend on anyone else's permission. Adrian called just before midnight. "Mom," he said, his voice warm and steady. "Everyone's talking about your speech. Even Dad called to say it was brilliant." "Did he?" I asked. "Yeah. He said he didn't realize how small the world looked from the top until you described the view from the bottom." That made me laugh quietly. "That's because real vision doesn't come from looking down," I said. "It comes from looking back and refusing to forget." He was quiet for a while. "You sound happy." "I am," I said simply. "Finally." After we hung up, I opened my window. The night air was cool, tinged with the scent of wet earth. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly, a reminder that even after calm, the world keeps moving. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't fear the storm. I welcomed it, because I knew that this time, I wasn't standing in the rain to survive it. I was standing in it because I had built my own shelter. 3 months later, life had settled into a rhythm that felt both unfamiliar and deeply right. The chaos had quieted. The wounds had turned into reminders, not weights. My days began early now, coffee at dawn, a walk through the park before the city woke. Peace had stopped feeling like an accident. It had become a choice I made each morning. The foundation scholarship had launched successfully. Cassandra kept her word. The first recipients were 3 women in their 40s, each beginning again after years of loss. A single mother studying accounting, a factory worker retraining in management, a widow opening her first small business. Their stories reminded me of who I once was. I met them at the office one afternoon, their eyes shining with the same mix of fear and determination I used to wear like armor. "Failure isn't the opposite of success," I told them. "It's the rehearsal for it. The trick is to keep showing up for the next act." After they left, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the sun slide behind the skyline. That was when I realized the story wasn't about revenge anymore. It had never truly been. It was about reclamation, the quiet art of taking your life back from those who thought they could define it for you. But peace, as I had learned, has its own tests. One morning, Adrian appeared at my door, his face pale. "Dad had a stroke," he said. "He's in the hospital." I felt a cold wave of memory the night I sat across from Victor, his voice thick with judgment, his hands slicing the air as he declared what I was worth. That version of him still lived in me, fossilized. Yet as I drove to the hospital, another truth began to surface. There comes a point in life when anger becomes too heavy to carry any further. When I entered the room, he looked smaller than I remembered. The man who once towered over every conversation now lay surrounded by wires and beeping monitors, his authority evaporated into the air-conditioned silence. His eyes flickered toward me, tired, frightened, unguarded. "You didn't have to come," he rasped. "I know," I said. "But I did." He tried to smile, but it collapsed halfway. "You always were stronger than I gave you credit for." "No," I said quietly. "You just never learned what real strength looks like." He closed his eyes, tears leaking from the corners. "Cassandra told me what you said that night. She said you were right. About everything." I sat down beside him. "Then let that be enough." For a long time we didn't speak. The machines filled the silence with their sterile rhythm, but somehow beneath that sound, something human stirred acceptance, maybe even grace. A week later, Victor passed peacefully in his sleep. Cassandra called me herself. Her voice was composed, but the tremor beneath it told me she was unraveling. "He asked for you in his last hour," she whispered. "He said to tell you, thank you for teaching him humility." That night, I lit a candle in my living room and sat in the stillness, thinking about the strange symmetry of it all. Life has a way of looping back to unfinished conversations, giving us one final chance to end them properly. At the funeral, the air smelled faintly of lilies and rain. Cassandra stood beside me, silent but resolute. When she spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "He never learned how to say it, but he respected you in the end." "I don't need his respect," I said, "just the peace of knowing the lesson landed somewhere." She nodded, her eyes glistening. You gave him that. After the ceremony, as people began to drift away, Adrian wrapped an arm around me. Mom, he said, you've forgiven everyone who hurt you. How do you do that? I thought for a moment. Forgiveness isn't about them, I said. It's about refusing to let them live rent-free in your heart. He smiled faintly. You always turn pain into poetry. I turn pain into purpose, I corrected. Poetry's just the sound it makes when it heals. Weeks later, I received a letter from one of the scholarship recipients, the widow who had opened her own bakery. The note was simple. I named it Helena's Hearth. Because warmth can be taught, and you taught me mine. I sat at my kitchen table and cried, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude so deep it felt almost holy. For all the years I had been dismissed, underestimated, silenced, this was the echo that answered back. By late spring, the city bloomed again. Cassandra invited me to join the foundation board. I accepted. It wasn't friendship, not exactly, but it was respect rebuilt from the wreckage of ego. Every meeting, I watched her listen more than she spoke, and I knew change, however fragile, was real. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about the version of myself from years ago, the woman sitting at that dinner table, humiliated but composed, her dignity the only thing she had left to cling to. I wanted to tell her it all worked out, that the humiliation became history, the anger became fuel, and the silence became her signature strength. Because that's what survival is. It's not just living through cruelty, it's learning to alchemize it, to turn it into something useful, even beautiful. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself walking by the river again, the same path I had taken after that first confrontation. The water glimmered gold, reflecting a skyline I had once feared I didn't belong to. Now it looked like mine. I stopped by the railing, closed my eyes, and whispered the truth aloud for no one but the wind to hear. I am not the woman you tried to break. I am the woman who built herself from the pieces you left behind. In that moment I felt it, the full circle of justice, not loud, not vengeful, but complete. And for the first time, I didn't just forgive the past, I thanked it, because without the cruelty, I'd never have discovered the quiet, unstoppable power of my own worth. The years that followed didn't arrive with fanfare. They slipped in quietly, like a tide that no longer needed to announce its strength. Peace, I learned, was not the absence of storms, it was the confidence that I could stand in the middle of one and remain unshaken. I was 72 when the foundation celebrated its 5th anniversary. The event was held at the same riverfront ballroom where, years ago, I had first stood before a crowd and reclaimed my voice. This time, I was not the keynote speaker. I was simply a guest of honor, sitting among the very women whose lives had been rebuilt from the scholarships that carried my name. One of them, a woman named Teresa, took the stage. Her voice trembled at first, but then steadied. When I applied for the Helena Duran scholarship, she said, I was living in my car. I thought I was applying for help, but what I received was permission to believe again. Her words hit something deep inside me. Permission to believe. That was what all of us had needed once, not charity, not applause, but permission to believe we were allowed to begin again. When the crowd applauded, Cassandra turned to me. She was older now, too, her once perfect posture softened by humility, her jewelry smaller, her laughter genuine. You built something that outlived the pain, she said quietly. I smiled. That was the point. She nodded. You were right about power. It isn't loud, it's consistent. After the speeches, I slipped away to the balcony. The river below shimmered in the soft evening light. I thought about all the versions of myself that had stood there before the woman who'd been dismissed, the one who fought back, the one who forgave, and now this one, who finally understood that survival and serenity can coexist. Adrian joined me a few minutes later, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. You know, he said, Simone and I were talking on the way here. We've been thinking about expanding the foundation mentorship programs, maybe even community centers. We want to name the new wing after you. I laughed softly. You're supposed to wait until I'm gone to do that. He shook his head. No. I want you to see it. You've spent your whole life building other people up. It's time you see how many of us are standing because of you." I looked at him, the boy I once carried through sleepless nights, now a man whose voice carried both strength and tenderness. "You already gave me what I wanted," I said. "You turned the lesson into legacy." Later that night, after the event, I returned home. The house was quiet, but it wasn't lonely anymore. It felt lived in, warm, the kind of silence that means peace, not absence. I brewed tea, sat by the window, and opened the journal I'd been keeping for years. The first entry was dated the night of that infamous dinner. The last page was blank, waiting. I began to write. 5 years ago, I thought my story ended at a table where I was meant to be humiliated. I didn't know it was only the beginning. I have learned that betrayal does not end you, it introduces you to the person you were meant to become. I have learned that forgiveness is not a gift for others, but an act of freedom for yourself. And I have learned that dignity, once reclaimed, becomes a light that outlives you. I paused, looking at the words. They didn't feel like closure, they felt like continuation. A soft knock broke the stillness. When I opened the door, Simone stood there, holding a small envelope. "We wanted you to have this," she said. "It's from the foundation board." Inside was a simple certificate, an official renaming of the foundation, the Duran Initiative for Second Chances. I traced the embossed letters with my fingers, feeling the texture of legacy pressed into paper. Simone smiled. "It's what you gave all of us, a second chance." That night, after she left, I sat in my garden under the stars. The air was cool, fragrant with night jasmine. Somewhere in the distance, the city pulsed with life, unaware of the quiet revolutions that begin in small, steadfast hearts. I thought of Cassandra, how we had started as adversaries and ended as allies, not because the past had vanished, but because we'd both chosen to outgrow it. I thought of Victor, whose lesson had come too late but still mattered. I thought of the women who wrote letters from across the country, saying they'd found work, built businesses, rebuilt themselves. Each letter was a chapter I hadn't written but somehow authored all the same. And I thought of the younger me, the one who once sat across a table of polished cruelty, holding her dignity like a weapon she wasn't sure she could wield. If I could speak to her now, I would tell her this: "You were never small. You were simply waiting to remember your size." The night breeze stirred the leaves. I closed my eyes and listened to the rustle of trees, the hum of the city, the heartbeat of a life that had finally come full circle. As the clock neared midnight, I returned to my desk and finished the final line of my journal. I spent years fighting to be heard. Now I understand the real victory was never being louder. It was becoming unshakably quiet inside, knowing who I am and who I will always be, a woman who refused to disappear. I set down my pen, closed the journal, and let out a long breath that felt like the exhale of an entire lifetime. Outside, a soft rain began to fall, gentle, cleansing, unhurried. I left the window open and watched it blur the city lights into a watercolor glow. It struck me then how everything, the humiliation, the rage, the redemption, had led to this single truth: peace is not inherited. It's built, choice by choice, day by day, by those brave enough to forgive without forgetting. And as I sat there, the rain steady against the glass, I realized I wasn't looking for endings anymore. Only beginnings that no longer frightened me. That was my legacy. Not revenge, not survival, but rebirth. In the end, Helena's journey wasn't just a story about standing up to arrogance or reclaiming her dignity. It was about rediscovering the quiet, unshakable power that comes from knowing one's own worth. Her life proved that the greatest victories don't happen in courtrooms, dinner tables, or public speeches. They happen in silence, when a person decides to stop being defined by what others think and starts defining themselves. From the moment she refused to bow to humiliation to the night she built a foundation that changed countless lives, Helena's story became a reflection of something universal: the resilience that lies dormant inside every person who has ever been underestimated. Forgiveness, too, took on a new meaning. It was not about excusing those who caused pain, but about freeing herself from the chains of resentment. Helena showed that peace isn't a gift someone hands you, it's something you build, brick by brick, Every time you choose compassion over revenge, purpose over bitterness, and grace over pride. Through her, we see that justice can be quiet, that dignity can be louder than anger, and that real power often wears the disguise of calm. The lesson here is timeless. Life will test your strength by breaking your image of control. But when that happens, remember Helena's truth. You are not defined by what others take from you, but by what you choose to rebuild afterward. Every betrayal, every humiliation, every "you're not enough" moment is an invitation to begin again, wiser and stronger. In a world that often measures worth through wealth, beauty, or social approval, her story reminds us that true wealth is character, true beauty is resilience, and true victory is peace. If you carry one message from her journey, let it be this: don't wait for others to validate your value. Live it, protect it, speak it quietly, and let your life echo it loudly. Because every time you stand tall after being broken, you rewrite the ending someone else thought they had the right to write for you. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a moment when standing up for your self-worth changed the way others saw you, or more importantly, how you saw yourself? Share your thoughts and stories below. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if Helena's journey inspired you, please subscribe to the channel so we can continue creating stories that remind us all of the strength, justice, and quiet courage that still exist in everyday life. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps them reach others who may need them most.